Iddo is a teacher. He holds several degrees in linguistics and other fields. He is, as I said, he lectures in various places, including instructing in the IDF School of Foreign Intelligence in matters of Middle East and Islam. And I hope I'm not forgetting, oh, he's a member of Seeds of Peace, which is an organization that is promoting dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians to try, not just Palestinians, I should say, but Arabs from the Middle East in order to create a more peaceful Middle East. So he's not just praying for the peace of Jerusalem, but he is acting in his way to try to promote it. And Iddo, is there anything I forgot to say?
And I should say also that I just finished a fellowship in the Mandel School of Educational Leadership, the Mandel Foundation, which acts also in the States and in Israel to create better education in general.
Do you know Yonina Flosheim?
With Yonina Flosheim,
so she's
whose brother you interviewed a few weeks ago.
Right, yes. So Yonina, who is she's leading it, or what is her? What is she doing?
She's in charge of everything that involves around teaching there, teaching certificates, teachers in general.
So she's the sister of Amot Israel, guys, who was our guest a few weeks ago. So there you go. It's all connected. It's all connected. So Iddo, except for Machon Mandel. So what can you tell us about the Middle East, Islam? Where do you want to start?
So it's a big question of where do I want to start. I probably should start 200 years ago. Go back 200 years and
that's like yesterday. You did not start in the Jahiliya period, right?
No, because you said you wanted to talk about contemporary events, and I thought contemporary events, that's 200 years ago. That's contemporary.
Right, that's contemporary. Listen, for me as a Bible teacher, like 200 years ago is like a moment ago. So
let's imagine we're going 200 years ago around what is today Israel, what was then a remote district of the Ottoman Empire, and you meet a falah, you meet a peasant, okay? And that peasant speaks Arabic. And you ask him, we'll imagine that for a second, what are you? What's your identity? So he'll probably do the same movement my dog does when I make a strange sound, which is like, huh? Like, what is identity in general? Or what, and you ask, what are you? What's your community? And he'll say he's a falah. He's a farmer. And if you push him further, he'll tell you that he probably would have told us that that he's a Muslim. And that would be about it. Now, if we take 200 years, we'll fast forward it 200 years to now. If you go around, for example, in Jenin or wherever, in the West Bank or in Gaza, or even inside 1948 Israel, if you ask someone what he is, the first answer he'll probably give you is Palestinian.
Just a second, Iddo. Aren't we kind of jumping from a falah to the Ummah al-Islam with forgetting like the family, the clan? Wouldn't they, identify more strongly with their? I don't know. I'm asking like because I'm not an expert on, but I get the feeling that they would identify before they would say, "Oh, I'm a Muslim. I'm from this and that tribe, or family or clan."
They would say that they're from this or that tribe or from this and that town, for example. But if you really try to see how they work politically, then okay. Today you'll find that it's Palestinian. And what I wanted to say with this demonstration, hypothetical demonstration, is that something has changed in the games of identity in the past 200 years in the Middle East and in the Arab, what we call the Arab world, and probably in the whole of the Muslim world.
For me, it's a big surprise, what you're saying. Because, again, I'm not an expert on the field. Just from hearing and reading, like again, I let myself say, because I'm not an expert, I hear experts like Dr. Mordechai Kida, who talks about the identity of Arabs in the West Bank as not being chiefly Palestinian, but chiefly associated still with a Hamula, with their clan or with their
Yeah,
city.
that's the main thesis of Dr. Mordechai Kida, who again I disagree with strongly, and I think I'll you know what I'll try to prove it to you. Okay,
Okay,
I'll try to prove it to you, but first let's try to describe
okay,
the historical development here. Okay, and for that we'll need to go a bit further back, just because being biblical, you want to go back. Um, so when we look, when Muslims in general look back at their history, okay, they see an empire. Now, it wasn't one empire, it wasn't one dynasty at all. It was different in different times. There were different kingdoms and different sultans and different caliphates. But in the general, if you look at the collective memory, it's one empire. And it starts with the Prophet Muhammad in the Arab Peninsula. But then 100 years after his death, already Muslims, the Muslim empire, the Arab empire, controls from Spain in the west to India in the east. In 700 in 711, Tariq bin Ziyad is crossing the straits of what would later be known as Jabal Tariq, the
right,
mountain of
Gibraltar,
Tariq,
right,
Gibraltar,
right.
and cross into Spain, and will conquer Spain in 7 years, and it will take the Spaniards or the Christians 700 years to take it back. Um, and from then on, up until 200 years ago, let's say, we'll try and set the dates straight in a second. There's one empire. That's a collective memory, and it's not a regular empire in any way. It's an empire that was born theologically. That the victory of the empire is proof that God is with us, with the Muslims. The birth of Islam in general is connected with sovereignty. Okay, and it's a vast empire. They treat the Indian Ocean as if it's their own Mare Nostrum, it's their own sea. To the point where when the Chinese need to send delegations to that sea, it's obvious that they're sending Zheng He, who's a eunuch, a Muslim eunuch in the Ming dynasty, because they want to connect with the Muslims. It's an empire that is strong militarily. It's culturally evolved. I love, when in Europe for 400 years, if mothers would want to say to their kids, want to frighten their kids, they say, if you don't eat, the Turk will come. Now they say it a bit differently, but it's there. And Turkey, the Ottoman Empire reached Vienna, okay? And it's an empire, we still use a lot of their symbols. Now, I'm very interested in history. I'm more interested in how history is translated in contemporary times. So, for example, President Obama's first speech outside of
Egypt, right, Cairo.
was in Cairo. And for 20 minutes, he stood and sang the praises of Islam and its contribution to society in general, to civilization in general. And it all happens between the 9th century and the 11th century in Iraq. And it was the hegemonic power. And now when Muslims look at their situation in general, not only are they not hegemonic, the Middle East is becoming more and more marginalized. The Arab world is becoming more and more marginalized, to the point where when we look at the Middle East today, the strong powers of the Middle East today are not Arab. It's Iran, it's Turkey, United States involved, and there's one more power in the Middle East that is not Arab, and that's Israel. So the thing is that Muslims in general, the collective idea was, or the 200 years since that fall, Muslims are asking themselves in general, what happened? what happened and how can we deal with it. And I would like to suggest a few dates just to be clear on when or around how or when it happened.
Iddo is freezing up.
Iddo is freezing for me as well. Yeah, just a second. I'll just check out what's happening with him.
Netanel, guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. We lost you at the part where you said you'd like to suggest a few dates. I can tell you that few ladies in the crowd started thinking, you know, flowers and stuff like that, but you meant historic dates, I guess.
Historical years.
Right. Yeah.
So there isn't a book about the Middle East that doesn't start with the modern Middle East that doesn't start with 1798. In 1798, Napoleon comes to the Middle East with the French army. And when he comes to Egypt, he comes with the three ideas of the French Revolution: liberté, égalité, fraternité. And the idea is that, you know, people are free or should be free and they're not slaves. In Islam, the idea is that you're Abdullah, you're the slave of God. You don't have rights, you have obligations, you have...
Right, guys, just note how many Arabic names start with Abdul, you know, with different names of God. So Abdul Aziz, Abdul Rahim, Abdul Wahab, Abdul this, Abdul that. Servant of, servant of. It happens in other Semitic languages, like we have Ovadia, we do in Aramaic, we have Abednego, but in Arabic it is all across the board.
Yeah, because the basic idea is, and we also have it, a certain idea of it also in Judaism, that you're not here to be free, you're here to work and praise God.
Right, but as you said, it is very emphatic in Islam. Even the name Islam, right, means surrendering before God.
The name Islam means submission to God.
Right.
But it also carries salam, which is peace.
Right, it is the same root in Hebrew as well.
Yeah.
Shalom could be surrendering or submitting. That's Hebrew. In the book of Deuteronomy, we have an example for that. But yes, when people say the religion of peace, obviously they are kind of avoiding the main meaning of the word and kind of digging.
Yeah, definitely.
They take the lexicon, they look at the bottom.
we should not avoid or ignore problematic issues like that. And I think that when Napoleon comes here, it's not I, it's researchers in general. When Napoleon comes here, these ideas of freedom, equality, of democracy, in essence, but there's a stronger idea that lives there, and that's a fraternité. That's the idea of nationalism. And from that point on, we can talk about different national identities that starts to grow in the Middle East. It also happens with there's another theory of how that started with the Turks. When Ottomans decided, or some of the Ottomans started to think of themselves as Turks and not as Ottomans, not as Muslims, the Arabs were asking, okay, if you're Turks, then what are we? So this is Napoleon, and there is a lot of historians that start there, that are saying, okay, this is where the Middle East is starting to change. But it will take another 100 years for the second big thing to happen. And the big thing to happen, of course, is the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And the fall of the Ottoman Empire is important because instead of, usually what happens in Islamic history is that after an Islamic dynasty comes another Islamic dynasty. The Umayyads fell and the Abbasids came. The Abbasids fell and the Mamluks came. The Mamluks fell and the Ottomans came, and so on and so forth. But when the Ottomans fell, no Islamic dynasty or no Muslim dynasty came after them. It was Sykes and Picot. It was France and Britain. And that's a major break, because if you imagine the line of thought of people saying, God is with us, we're victorious, with a strong empire, with hegemony, and to have that hegemony crumble, and instead of that comes what would later we'll see that there is no Middle East without Western intervention, without Western influence. So that's another important year. And there's another important year which usually historians didn't pay much or didn't pay much attention to. In 1924, the new Turkey under Ataturk decided to dismantle the caliphate. Now, this caliphate, the institution of caliphate, is something that went like a thread in Islam from 632, from the day the Prophet died, and Abu Bakr became the first caliph, to the days of the Ottomans. And usually, when a caliph died, came another caliph. It could be from the same dynasty or from another dynasty, but there was someone. It was totally symbolic sometimes. It wasn't even a political. It didn't carry political power sometimes, but it was symbolic. It was a symbolic figure that lasted, or a symbolic institution that lasted for 1,400 years. And that crumbled in 1924 when Ataturk decided to he actually banished the last caliph to Paris, and then said that all his authorities go to the Cumhuriyet, to the Turkish
Republic,
which became, of course, secular and very much Western, to the point of changing even the language
script
itself.
right? The script.
Not even the orthography. The orthography,
Yeah.
Turkish is now written in Latin letters, but today you cannot read Ottoman documents because it's a lost language, basically. And that was a very important date, and we didn't pay attention to it up until 9/11, because when Osama bin Laden took responsibility for 9/11, he said that 80 years of Muslim inferiorness ended with 9/11. And historians went running through what happened 80 years ago. And that was 1924, it was in process from 1922 to 1924 that this happened. And in a sense, when we look at the Arab world today, when we look at the Middle East today, we look at a religion in crisis, a civilization in crisis that actually responds to this crisis, to these big events, the end of the caliphate, the end of the Islamic dynasties, and the Western ideas and Western hegemony that starts. And the big question is, how do Muslims deal with it? And I would like to suggest at this point that there are basically two big ways that the Muslim world tried to work through this crisis. One way we'll call it the Western way, in a sense, adopting Western ideas. And the other way would be the Muslim way, or the Islamic way. And it's, again, we're talking about political ways to deal with the religious crisis, in a sense. And what happened was that, let's talk about the Western ways for a second, because that was something that was very institutionalized. What was institutionalized in the Middle East since 1924, since 1918, was nation states and national apparatus. What's the plural of
I think
apparatus?
apparata.
Apparata?
Maybe.
Because that would be apparatum in Latin, but never mind.
No, apparatum would be the plural of apparatus?
No, apparatum would be the individual.
Right, so you want to go with the plural here. Apparatuses,
yeah,
thank you very much.
Apparatuses, okay.
Okay.
So national apparatuses and nationalism was institutionalized, okay? The Western way, in a sense, was institutionalized in the Middle East during the 20th century. The Islamic way was anti-institution. It developed in the streets. It developed in underground ways. It developed in the society itself, but not with the state itself. What happened was that we had nation states established through either mandates or through revolutions, decolonizations and stuff like that. But the idea, in the general idea, when you look at the Middle East in the 20th century, apparatuses, okay. And when you look at the 20th century, you have nation states that were one-party states, whether they're revolutionary socialists like in Iraq or Egypt or Syria, or whether they're monarchs that still have some links to tradition and religion like Saudi Arabia or Jordan. You have these authoritarian states that even when they speak in the name of religion, like in Saudi Arabia, they are actually talking nationality. They're actually saying national ideas. And with revolutionary state, it was socialism also. With monarch state, it was more capitalism, but it was Western ideas, Western influence, the influence of the Cold War. There's a very interesting moment in World War II where the Nazis had a lot of effect here. But again, it's Western influence. But on the Islamic side, this developed anti-institution, against the institution. See,
Not that it really
we're
doesn't
still
matter.
doing the apparatus thing.
Yeah, no, I leave it. Don't worry, you don't have to. I kind of do it in between to keep it interesting.
Okay. When basically what the national leaders said was, we're not against Islam, but this is not our political identity. Okay. When Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was president of Egypt in the 50s and the 60s, he was talking about Arab nationalism. He was talking about socialism. He was talking about Africa as a circle for identity for Egypt. And he was also talking about Islam, but he was not talking about it politically. People who talk about, and of course, the United Arab Republic, which was a failure. I should say something here about national identity, because in the Middle East, when we play the national game of identity, then we're doing a dual game, because Judaism has its own problems with nationalism. Okay, whether you're more Jewish or more Israeli, or whether you're more religious or secular, there's a whole game there of identities. In the Middle East, we have two ways to look at national identities. There's Qawmiya, which is Arab pan-Arabism, Arab nationalism, and there is Wataniya. Wataniya is territorial nationalism. I'm Jordanian, okay, or Syrian, or Palestinian, or Lebanese. But there are also people who are Arabs. Now,
right, a little bit Wataniya is like patriotism.
Well,
in the sense that patria is the land in which you're born. Like, so.
Exactly. But patriotism has a whole semantic feel to it, which I'm not sure.
I think that's the translation of what
it is the translation, but when we talk about,
right.
You can be an Arab patriot. You can be a
right.
And a patriot. And it won't be to Egypt, it will be to the Arab world. Now, in some years, in the 50s, in the 60s of the 20th century, Qawmiya was an idea that was very popular.
Right, and even formed into a political shape, pan-Arabism, right?
But it was never really an option. It was never really an option. Between 1958 and 1961, there was the United Arab Republic, Al-Jumhuriyya Al-Arabiyya Al-Muttahida, between Egypt and Syria. It didn't last more than 3 years, and it was meant for failure. The Arab League was a workable force. Sorry, I can't see the.
No, don't worry. Go ahead. So,
it was a force to reckon with, the Arab League, for years in the Arab world. There was, especially with treating Israel, okay, whether it's a United Arab Front in 1967, whether it's some sort of cooperation and collaboration in 1973 in Yom Kippur War between Egypt and Syria. So it had political implementations, but basically it was through the nationalism, through the Wataniya that it worked. And we can't say now that it's totally dead. I think that it lives in what I call track 2 politics, which is cultural politics. Like, for example, if you look at TV shows, so you have the big Arab TV networks, the news networks. You have Al Jazeera, you have
but Al
Al
Jazeera and Al
Arabiya.
Arabiya, these examples of Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya, these are examples of nation states who are suggesting something that is Arabic in the same way the BBC has Arab broadcasting, or America, Sky News, or Russia. They are
Yeah, but we can
trying
go. But
to
we can go.
represent their national, interest, and to kind of broadcast it all around the Arab world. And they themselves have different, Al Jazeera is very much representing the interest of Qatar, right? And Al
And Al
Arabiya
Arabiya is the
different,
United
right,
Arab Emirates. That's
right.
true.
And so they are pan-Arab in the sense that they broadcast to all Arabs, but the BBC is broadcasting to all Arabs, and Israel would maybe have a station like that, that we had in Kol Israel, and so it doesn't make them, in a sense, pan-Arab, right?
No, but I would go another length. Okay, you don't have Egyptian Idol. Okay, you have Arab Idol. A lot of Arabs are very, for example, culturally very happy with George Clooney's wife. Okay, Amal Clooney, who's Arab. Everybody's proud of her. You have like now people who are around 22 who are named Zen ad-Din. Zen ad-Din, after Zinedine Zidane, the French footballer who won the World Cup in 1998. So you have like a surge of people who are now 22 are called Zen ad-Din around the Arab world. And you have, people read the same literature sometimes, they see the same movies, they see the same Ramadan, special shows for Ramadan. So you have this culture slash political culture that is still alive. But the political implementation of this, it no longer exists. When you look at the Arab League, the League of Arab Nations, it's a joke. No one treats it now the same way it was treated in the 50s and the 60s. So this blip of idea that you might have a Qawmiya now, that you might have a pan-Arabism, that died in 1970 with Nasser. And to prove it finally, or a final proof, is that there's only one country in the Middle East where you can be Arab, listed as an Arab, and that country is Israel.
Hey, Israel! I knew the answer is coming.
Only in Israel can you be Arab. In Syria, you're Syrian. In Lebanon, you're Lebanese. Only in Israel, can you be Arab? And can people still treat? There's this poll that went 2 weeks ago where a lot of Arab citizens of Israel identify as Arabs and as Israelis rather than as Palestinians, which is very interesting to think about, because the elite and the intellectuals are talking about it very differently. And we have what? Ike Idol. So this is about Pan-Arabism. The Wataniya, however, the apparatus
so
of the
far,
state.
just a second, let me kind of recap what we said so far. So far, we've talked about like Pan-Arabism, the notion of all of the Arabs in the Middle East. Generally, do you include North Africa in it? Like the
You can include North Africa because it was part of it.
Okay.
But again, there's also a big difference.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about this pan-Arabism. So far, when an Arab think about himself, be that in Jordan, in Lebanon, or in Egypt, he says, "Okay, I'm an Arab, right? Write down I'm an Arab," like Muhammad Darwish, the famous song poem that he wrote. But I'm an Arab, and that is the kind of a pan-Arab that is like a British. If we talk about like the British Commonwealth, a little bit, it's not the same, right? It's not the same political entity, but I'm Canadian, I am Australian, I am Kiwi, a Pommy, an Aussie, whatnot. I'm English, I'm Irish, I'm Scottish, Northern Ireland. Um, so I'm British, but within those own kind of British, which would be equivalent to Arab, we have all of these specific uh, national identities. So the general community would be Arab. That is the general perception that we've talked about so far, pan-Arabism. Now we're getting in to talk about wataniya, patriotism, specific reference to nationality, nation state. Okay, right?
Yeah,
That's the point. Okay.
that's the point. And to emphasize that these two are still part of the Western choice, or Western imitating, I would say, even choice of people in the Middle East,
Okay.
because
Within the right, the Western
we have a whole
reaction
side that
to
we have a whole side of Islamic answers that we haven't touched on yet, and we will touch
okay.
later on.
Yeah,
Um,
we have 4 hours, no problem.
yeah,
No, I'm
yeah,
just kidding. We
usually
don't, but we'll don't worry.
I'll,
Maybe we'll have you. You'll have to come again. Yeah.
I'll try to do it a bit briefly in this
No,
sense,
you can do it. You
because
can do it slowly. It's of interest. I enjoy it.
so the thing is that both Wataniya and Khawmiya is Western. It's not original to the Middle East. But from the two, Wataniya is even more problematic, because when you look at the lines of the different states in the Middle East, they're very straight and they're arbitrary, as if someone draw them with a ruler. And
It's not
that's
as
because
if.
someone draw them with a ruler, and that's French and English, Sykes and Picot. A line in the sand, as one of the books that talk about it says, they simply draw a line in the sand. What is the real difference between an Egyptian who lives in the south of Egypt, in what we call a Sa'id, which is Upper Egypt, and it has a line between him and his Sudanese sometimes brother? Okay, they speak, even when we talk about Arabic, spoken Arabic, they speak the same spoken Arabic. Okay, he's much similar in culture to the person who's from the other side of the border, which was drawn by the British. Then he's much closer to him than to someone in Cairo. Write down two words.
Yeah,
You do that.
I'll
Um,
try. Right.
so Wataniya is very problematic. When you look at Jordan, for example, okay, the Kingdom of Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, which was established as Transjordan in 1921, was a British decision or promise to Sharif Hussain, who was the leader of the Arabs at that time, that his sons will get kingdoms in the Middle East. But his son Abdallah was supposed to have a kingdom in Hijaz, in Al-Madinah and Mecca. But those were actually conquered by the Saudis, by another tribe. So the British decided to take a part of their mandate on Palestine and form this Transjordan. There's nothing there culturally. There's nothing there politically. It had to be established in 70 years. Also Iraq. What is connecting a Shiite from Basra in the south to a Sunni Arab from Baghdad in the center to a Kurdish Sunni from Kirkuk in the north?
Right. No, there is something to be said about this in every place, in a sense. what is the difference between a farmer on the German Holland, German Netherlands, border, and where they speak the same type of German or Dutch? They would, you would step across the board, and today there is no border, and they would still speak the same kind of almost the same dialect of the same language, which you couldn't tell if it's German or Dutch. They could say, "Oh, I speak German," but they speak something that is very close to the Dutch of the next door neighbor. So
I don't,
you know.
I don't think it's unique to the Middle East. I think it happened late in the Middle East because
Right.
French identity was forged with the French Civil War that sometimes is referred to as the French Revolution, where language like Aquitaine and Provençal was basically erased by Parisian French.
Yeah,
Or
you can see this still in Spain,
and you can
with
still see it in
Catalan, right?
Spain. But there's also one other small difference, that the idea of creating Iraq was not Arab, it was British. And even when you look at the flags, for example, of the Arab world, we all know the colors, right? Green, black, white, and red. Different forms, but these are the four colors. The person who suggested this flag as a tribute to the Islamic history was Colonel Mark Sykes. Yes, the same guy from Sykes and Picot. So even when you look at the flags, even if you look at the basic way of people identifying, that piece of cloth on a broom, as Herzl called it, it's not autochthon. It's not part of the identity here. So it took a lot of years to forge that identity through education, through political structures that were sometimes oppressive, through authoritarian regimes that all the time had to fight for their legitimacy because they were leaning on Western powers. And I would have to say that I think personally that it worked, okay? And again, if you ask Palestinians today, they're Palestinians. That's their political goal. If you ask, even now, when you see the crumbling down of these nation states, when you look at Syria, when you look at Iraq, when you look at what happened in Egypt, at what we call the Arab Spring or the Muslim winter or the rattling of the Middle East, when we look at that, we see that people are not saying we're not Iraqis. Okay, even the Kurds are saying we're Iraqis, but we want more rights. Okay, even the Kurds in the north did not dare declare independence. In that
Do you
sense,
think it's a principled not daring, or is it an opportunist? I'm asking myself. Listen, the Alawites in Syria. Okay, let's say tomorrow Bashar al-Assad is not in power anymore. Would they treat themselves as Syrians, but now we have to look for a different regime in Syria, or would they look at themselves as Alawites? We have to protect ourselves as a minority, as a religious minority, as an ethnic or basically religious minority. Do they think of themselves as Alawite first or Syrian first? I think
I think it's complicated, but I think it in the basic layer of things, the nation state is still alive, very much alive in the Middle East. And I would give an example from the rebels in Syria. Okay, when they started shouting and going in 2011, they shouted three things. They shouted Allah, Hurriya, Suriya, Ubas. And this is just to translate God, freedom, Syria, and that's it. And this is, again, against the Ba'ath Party, which is the ruling party in Syria, which is saying, Wahda Hurriya Ishtirakiya, unity, freedom, and socialism, which is basically, by the way, you can say liberté, égalité, fraternité. It's the same. Napoleon still lives in these words. I think that this is what we see today. We see in Iraq, we see the Shiites in Iraq, in the south, They go out with the flag, with the Iraqi flag. You had a Kurd senior as president of Iraq for a lot of time. You also see disintegrating nations. You also see Libya, for example, okay, that is now split into two, which is basically the two principal units that formed Libya before it became Libya, Tripolitania and Cyrenaica. So you see also disintegrated nation, but you also see people who after 70 years of being told that they're Iraqi or Lebanese, think that they're Iraqi or Lebanese, even though it's fairly new in sense. So this is the Western idea, or the Western ideas. But there's also the Muslim ideas, the Islamic ideas. And again, this Islam is a political Islam. It was anti-institution. It developed in the streets. It developed in non-governmental, you might even call them non-governmental organizations, although they don't carry the same human rights feel to it.
The Ikhwan generally, like.
And the biggest one, of course, is Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, the Muslim Brotherhood, or the Muslim Brethren, which was established in Egypt in 1928. But what basically these organizations are saying, or started saying, we'll see, it became more complicated, they started saying, we're not Western. They looked back and they said, we lost to the West because we weren't Muslim enough. We need to be more Muslim. We need to embrace Islam as a modern political identity. And the majority of this organization, leaving for a second ISIS behind, or outside this category, the majority of these organizations are making this very interesting marriage between Islamic traditional ideas, or even Islamic revolutionary ideas, but very Islamic ideas, with the idea of the nation state. When the Muslim Brethren, even when they started, they said, we're talking about Egypt, and then we'll do it in Jordan, and then we'll do it in Lebanon, and eventually we'll make enough Islamic revolutions in the world, so we'll have this united Islamic states. But they're talking through the apparatus of the modern state.
They're kind of combining the Bolshevik and the Menshevik mentality of the revolution, right? Interesting.
But it's not, other than ISIS, okay? They're not talking about the return of the caliphate, okay? It was, which is trying to change society. Elsewhere, it's trying to reform religion. Yeah, it's true. They went to society itself, but they went to society and they tried to create Islam as a political, wholesome or holistic identity where everything you do is not only the personal things you do, but the political things you do is supposed to be Islamic. But, you know, bin Laden maybe in his sleep dreamt about the caliphate. Maybe
right. At least when you talked about 80 years since Muslim humiliation, it refers to like returning to
there.
Right.
It was there, but it was in the process, and then came ISIS and said, no, we're doing it now. And if you compared it to socialism, it's the difference between Stalin and Trotsky in a sense. Stalin said socialism in one country, in one state.
I already guessed it. You know, I was pushing there with the Bolshevik and the Menshevik, right?
So ISIS is like Stalin in that sense. But they're saying, we'll establish it right here, right now, the caliphate. We'll have an Islamic state right here, right now. And what Al-Qaeda wanted was the eternal revolution, in a sense, or the world revolution, like Trotsky. But Al-Qaeda and ISIS are very, very radical, and radical religiously, okay? We call them reformists, okay? Reformists because they're skipping tradition backwards. They're saying 1,400 years of tradition is bullshit. Let's go back to biblical, to Quranic times. Let's read the Quran. And this is very hard to do in a very traditional society where people are saying, I pray. Why do I pray? Because my father prayed. And what Al-Qaeda and ISIS are saying religiously is, your father didn't know what he was doing. You should go back to what the Prophet said. The Muslim Brethren and other organizations like that, which are bigger than Al-Qaeda and ISIS, are saying we should take our father's tradition. We should take that tradition and make it political and make the apparatus of the modern state work for us and become a sort of Sharia state, the state of the Islamic law. And that was nice, and it was very good while they were anti-institutional, but because of the Arab Spring, they had the misfortune of becoming presidents, of winning. And you cannot be anti-institutional Islam and be in the institution at the same time. And then they discovered it's more problematic. The same thing, by the way, happened with Hamas in Gaza. Okay, right. Once they become government, once you're in the government, you have to think more in more complicated terms than saying we're just
quoting an Israeli prime minister who ended up retreating from the Gaza Strip. He said famously, things you see from here, you don't see from there. After he promised he wouldn't do it, and he was elected, and then he decided to do it anyway. So that was his excuse for that.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the time, and I want people to ask questions. So I'll just sum up in general what I was saying.
Listen, Iddo, what this means is that you have to come again. That's I don't know if you realized it, but you're kind of in the middle. We're not letting you off the hook that easy. Okay.
So I'll say something to sum things up now, and I promise whenever you want me, I'll come.
Okay, very good. So you'll summarize. We'll have like 2 questions, and then
to say that basically we're talking about the Middle East, or people in the Middle East living through a religious crisis and trying to find political solutions for that religious crisis. A religion that started with sovereignty, lost after 1,400 years that sovereignty. And people are looking either for solutions that are national solutions but are not original or authentic in a sense, whether it's patriotism, as you called it, wataniya, being Jordanian, or whether it is qawmiya, being pan-Arabist or being an Arab, and also more radical answers like the Islamic answer that has the traditional Islamic answer that is the Muslim Brethren, or the radical Islamic answer, which is ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Just as an idea to think about, that the conflict that we experience as Israelis and Palestinians in the region is not only a national conflict, but it's not only a religious conflict. It's also, in a sense, a civilizational conflict, in the sense that the religion that is Islam, that lost its sovereignty after 1,400 years, met going down the religion that lost its sovereignty 2,000 years ago and now earned that sovereignty back. So in a sense, it's that meeting that is conflictual and maybe even more problematic. So that's...
Yes, so what we call, power vacuum, if something's got to give. If something is retreating, something is pushing forward. So we'll have few questions about this point, and you did very nicely. You presented the crisis, and we started talking about the answers diverging into Western-like solutions and Islam-like solutions, and diverging further into wataniya, qawmiya versus Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. Very nice, very, very structured. I liked it. Guys, 2-3 questions, and we got Iddo for at least one other time to continue this discussion. And it's all because I make a point to interrupt. If I wouldn't interrupt, he would have gotten all. So you have to thank me for Iddo coming again.
We still didn't say a word about Shiite, Sunnite.
Right, Shiite and Sunnite.
This would be our next meeting.
Okay, sure. Simon, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question from the humanistic point of view, and maybe it's something I should disclose. As an Englishman, I find it to this day very difficult to go to Ireland because of what we did to the Irish. That's my cultural identity is very much riddled with guilt. Okay, so that's sort of my perspective. And that's why I try to adopt a humanistic view that all people are equal, that we have to have a secular identity in which everyone's rights are protected. What fascinated me about your talk was that you seem to be moving towards an understanding of Islam, which was something that we could, I suppose, as secular Westerners, we could identify with, rather than looking in some horror at this billion people who are out there who we really don't understand, and they've got lots of oil and they don't publish any books. But can you, do you think that's something you're actually doing, that you're helping us towards a humanistic understanding, which can actually bring diverse people together?
Well, thank you for Simon. For me, it's the biggest compliment I've heard because it's exactly what I'm trying to. I truly and honestly think that this is not a clash of civilizations. This is a meeting of civilizations that can be fertile and can be humanistic. Now, I'm a secular atheist myself. But I'm fascinated by religion, and I'm fascinated by people who see religion in a humanistic way. And there's this famous rabbi in Israel, he's no longer with us, Menachem Froman, he was a settler. He was one of the first settlers in the West Bank. And he always said that religion is not only the problem, it's also a solution. It can also be a solution. And again, being a secular atheist, I couldn't agree more. And I think there are ways to go through the particular religions to become more humanistic. So yes, this is definitely what I'm trying to do. And I will also, sorry, yeah.
No. Coattailing what you said, and in the English sense of it, even I would recommend Simon looking up Majid Nawaz and Quilliam in this context. I don't know. Are you familiar with Majid Nawaz, Iddo?
No.
Oh, and Quilliam, you'll have a field day with it. I'll send you later on the information.
You'll send me the links, yeah.
Sure. I don't know if you've heard about him. He is one of the very interesting voices within Islam today that is very different, obviously, than other voices. And Quilliam is the organization he is heading that is trying to reform Islam in a humanistic way. So it's really, he co-authored a book with Sam Harris. You might have heard about Sam Harris. So,
yeah, I heard. Yeah.
So he co-authored a book with Sam Harris, and you know, again, I disagree with both, but I love hearing both. You know, so it's fascinating, and that's a little bit, you know, coattailing what you said. I'm not an expert, as I said. And Jerry.
Just to say, I don't have a book. I should. I don't have a book. I've been teaching, not writing.
You don't have a book yet. You don't have a book yet.
And you know, I've known atheists that were very religious. Just to answer another question, I've known people who wore a kippah and were Haredic but didn't think that there's a God above. So in Judaism, there could be a difference between the two.
Right. I sometimes say that in Judaism, it's not exact, but I sometimes say that in Judaism you can believe in one God or less. So,
yeah.
some people say that. It's not my kind of take, but it's something that resonates with people.
Yeah.
So Quilliam, I sent a link to their website, and if you want, you can follow from there on Majid Nawaz and others who are dealing exactly with that. So for those of you who are looking for that, Jerry, you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah. My question to you is in the actual core of Islam the necessity to expand and go beyond its borders? It just seems to me that there's a just an innate quality within it, the religion itself, to be one of expanding. Where in Judaism, I don't know of any empire that conquered the world through Judaism, but I do see it in Christianity, and I do see it in Islam. I just wonder if that is something is basic to its teachings.
Thanks for the question. It's a great question. In traditional Islam, there's a division they do between Dar al-Islam, the house of Islam, and Dar al-Harb, the house of war. And the idea is that Dar al-Islam is where it's Islamic, under Islamic control, and Dar al-Harb is where it should be under Islamic control. It will be under Islamic control. Now, and this division, or even theological division, I would say, was very much part of Muslim expansion in the first centuries for the Islamic Empire, and it was kind of reignited under the Ottomans when they conquered basically the majority of the south of Europe, Yugoslavia, Kosovo, Bosnia, its part, and even Greece, Hungary were under Ottoman rule, and that was reigniting the idea of Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam. Now, today, there's a big argument about it for two reasons. A, what is Dar al-Islam when you don't have a sovereignty of Islam? What is the house of Islam when there is no Islamic sovereignty, when there is no caliphate? Is it Islamic states? Is it secular states with Muslim majority, like in Turkey, for example? It's a big question there. The other problem is Dar al-Harb. What happens? My master's thesis was on Muslims in Europe. This is the one thing I know about. So Muslims in Europe, for example, some of them live better, not only economically, but even as Muslims than Muslims in Saudi Arabia, for example. So how come Europe is considered Dar al-Harb and Saudi Arabia is considered Dar al-Islam? And there are a lot of people who are now saying, no, we cannot live by that division. But you're right that to a certain extent in its core, Islam, like in Christianity, by the way, has the same idea of truth, where we have to spread it. We have to make everybody believe in our truth. In Judaism, our truth is, we have it, you have yours, it's okay. Just you stay there and don't kill us, basically. So it's two different ideas of how universal truths are working, which is, again, to me, fascinating.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you very much, Iddo, for coming. You understand that we will be so thankful to have you again. It was a pleasure. And yeah, it's fascinating. For a second there, something that I want to add. If I understand correctly, most of what you said, and again, we'll get to it in the next part, is dealing with Sunni Islam mostly, okay? Shiite Islam has different subtleties. So most of it pertains to Sunni Islam, which indeed constitutes the majority of Muslims in the world. So kind of, if you hear tomorrow that the Islam divides the world into Dar al-Mu'minin and Dar al-Kufar, so it might be like different subtleties that we'll talk about maybe next time when we talk about the Sunni and the Shiite. And what's the story about this? And it was fascinating. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
It's
Thank
been a
you very much.
pleasure. Thank you. And whenever
Thank
you
you.
call me, I'm here.
Okay,
Thank you,
excellent.
Iddo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Be
thank
careful
you.
what you wish for, Iddo. Right,
Do
right.
come again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, tomorrow, by the way, Iddo, you know that tomorrow we're going to have Rabbi Dr. Sharon Shalom, which also should be rather fascinating. And guys, again, tomorrow's lecture also doesn't require any previous knowledge of Hebrew. Today we had a lot of Arabic in the lecture. I was proud of myself that I understood what's going on. and tomorrow we'll I don't know about if tomorrow it's going to be in Ethiopian or Ge'ez. I'm not sure I could hold the same as I did with the Arabic here, but we'll ask Rabbi Dr. Shalom Shalom to go easy on us. And that's the plan. And I'll see you. Yeah. Ethiopian is the old name for Ge'ez. Today it's Amharic. Though several languages are spoken in Ethiopia. I'm not getting into this picture. So, yeah. It used to be Ge'ez, used to be referred to in like scholarship as Ethiopian. Anyway, we'll see you guys. Oh, Iddo has a linguistic undergraduate degree, right? So he knows all about that as well. And I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.